Tom DeRosa from Creation Studies Institute. It's a distinct privilege to be here today to talk to you about God the Creator. And one of the things our ministry focuses on, Creation Studies Institute, is to get the truth about God as a creator. And this series, called Dismantling Evolution, is part of our mission. It's what we really declare. We want to speak the truth. And unfortunately, in today's society, we're being fed lots and lots of lies. And so we need to discern truth. Of course, God's word will always remain. So we're centered on God's word. So as I share this presentation with you, and we start going through dismantling evolution, I just want you to note that we are continually looking at this. And we're looking at each detail today. We're going to look at the details that deal with the idea that molecules, the things that make us up, where do they fit? I don't want to go crazy with you about molecules and teach you biochemistry and all of that. That's not what we're trying to do here today. But we want to let you just see a little bit, just to see something about the Creator God and take back a tidbit with you. So as we go through this series, this will be the second part of the series. This series will be dismantling evolution from molecules and up. It's a three-part series. So we start off with these questions because they've always been around. Society, I don't think you're confused, but maybe society is confused. Question, how did we get here? Do people really think about that? I think they do. I think it's important to know how you got here. I also think another important question is, where did everything come from? So we know that those are two important questions, but there's conflict over those questions. Continually will be, because one says God, the other one says materialism, naturalism, and so on. So we want to reflect off that. And what we've done in the first one is dismantle evolution from the beginning. This one, we're going to dismantle evolution from molecules and up. And the next one, we're going to dismantling evolution from the ape to man myth. So we'll take the ape to man myth in March, the last Friday of the month, and we'll discuss that. Okay? So today, dismantling evolution from molecules on up. So as we begin, I wanted to just review with you the last session. And we talked about naturalism and scientism. Scientism is the idea of truth finding with science. Naturalism is the fact that nature is God. The forces of nature is what makes us. And it goes very well with the idea of evolution, because evolution is defined in terms void of God. Most times you will hear it void of God in textbooks, universities, void of God. And that's what we take issue with. Conflict exists in how the universe and living things came to be. Was it by chance or was it by God's word? We see this. The conflict of evolution and creation will always be here as long as the devil is roaming around. The fact that he's the greatest deceiver and liar around, he's going to keep working on these people. And we understand that the Holy Spirit is part of this. The Holy Spirit opens our eyes so we can see the truth. If you're blinded, you cannot see. So we always pray to God that through his Holy Spirit, he can open the mind of people. Very important for us as we move out. And there are many people who say, I want to witness to my son. I want to witness to my children. I want to witness to my uncle, my aunt. There's always a witness involved. And they think by giving them the facts of science and so on, they're going to bring them to Christ. Well, folks, it's the work of the Holy Spirit. But we need to be able to give answers, because our faith is a genuine faith. It's a logical faith. And so when we look at these answers, we want to be able to reflect with them. And so we see very clearly that nature and its laws is what the evolutionists preach. And we say God and his word is what carries everything. And that's what we want to make sure it's clear throughout the seminar that God's word really claims. We also talked about the Big Bang. We talked about the idea of a Big Bang. That's a big mystery. It's a one-time event. We can't observe it. And we can't observe it. It doesn't fall into operational science. So guess what? A lot of hypotheses, a lot of ideas, crazy ideas, come from it. It also comes from chance. The Big Bang didn't happen by scientific, we can we can now nail it down. We know how the Big Bang. No, we don't know. It's all by chance. Again, we're narrowing it down to chance. You see that there are many problems with the Big Bang, like there's missing energy. How did it get started? How did all that inflation, just be able to be created? All that stuff is, they can't discuss, there's no solution to that. There's no answers to that right now. So if you don't know how it got started and you know how it inflated, start to begin and start moving out, how does that happen? And of course, we always deal with the idea that God is in the center. So there's God's word that says in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the world says that, hey, we believe in matter and materials. We know that God has, in essence, of divine intelligence, and he is the creator of a fine-tuned universe, which we saw overwhelmingly. We looked at last week's lesson. Can explosion produce order? Think about this. The Big Bang says we're going to have a big explosion, and as we move matter out, in a chaotic way, eventually it's going to cool off and eventually form order. Now, can an explosion really form order? So that's the question. The Big Bang violates the second law of thermodynamics. So no matter what we do, the law of thermodynamics is always against us. So even when we discuss molecules and up, we're going to realize that there's always a force working against us. Why? Because in the universe, we have this law that says where there's order, there's going to be disorder. You follow? So, you straighten up your living room, your kitchen, or whatever, and what happens? Eventually it gets disordered. That's what we know. We know that everything goes disorder. Your car will run out eventually. You have to buy a new car. We know that order always goes to disorder. We live, we're born, and then we die. That's disorder. So we are subject to it no matter what we do or where we go. So we understand that by faith, this was the key verse last week, Hebrews 11:3. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made of what was visible. So we started with the invisible, and God literally put it together to make the visible. The invisible God, follow this, invisible God made a universe so that we could see him. We can see his properties, we can see his magnificence. Just by looking at the stars in nighttime, you can see God's magnificence. So today we're going to focus a little differently. And I thought in this introduction, I'd give you a little workout. What am I talking about? This sounds a little crazy, but we're going to do it anyway. You know about tornadoes, right? Some of us live in Florida. We know about hurricanes. And something like a tornado, right? This is a tornado in central Nebraska. Tornadoes represent the forces of nature, don't they? Lots of strong forces, okay? We know that they have specific conditions to produce one. You have to have specific conditions to produce a tornado. And they tell us these are the specific conditions. It's called SLIM, shear, lift, instability, and moisture. I'm not giving a meteorology course, but I'm just letting you know that there are factors in which we can understand a tornado is going to come. So the weather forecaster is able to predict, hey, it looks like we might have some tornadoes there because they look at those 4 factors, okay? So we have an idea about tornadoes. Matter of fact, we really have an idea because if you take a look, some of the things that we can capture on film, take a look at this one. These are tornado hunters. They're moving up closely. We're not going to see the whole thing, but you can see the power of that thing. Coming up. There's the force coming out. They're coming right close to it. See it. Cloud above, a vacuum will lift, a shear from the bottom. Before you know it, you have this tremendous force, tremendous amount of speed. So we know about these things, right? Tornadoes always present fear for the power they have within. You agree with me, right? Now, what am I talking about tornadoes when I'm supposed to be talking about molecules and up? We just got, well, wait a second. Let's do this one. Let's talk about spiders, arachnids. I know some of you don't like spiders. They don't have a good reputation, don't they? Oh, well, let's take a look at them. First, They have 4 pairs of legs. Insect has 6 pairs of legs. And insects dominate the animal kingdom. They make at least half of them up, half the animal kingdom up. I don't know if you know that. Yeah, I'm going to teach you a little biology today. We're going to have some fun. But this is a spider, 4 legs, different than an insect. Insect has 3 pairs. This has 4 pairs. Okay, it doesn't have an antenna. Most of them, all insects have antennae. By the way, crustaceans like lobsters and shellfish and things of this nature, they basically, crabs, they function just like these, like insects. They call them the insects of the ocean, shrimp and so on. So they have a cephalothorax, which means what? Their head is fused to their thorax. It's like if I were to go around and my head was fused to my thorax, you know, whenever I turn, you know what I'm saying? Well, their head is one all together, really fused together. Now, follow me. I'm going to get to the molecules in a second. Now, you see that spiders have a very different way of looking and seeing. Like they even have poisonous fangs. Everybody knows about these poisonous fangs, right? They are poison. Every spider has a poison in it. That's how they kill their prey. Now, some of you might say, well, when I've been bit by a spider, yeah, they hurt. They do hurt. The black widow, yeah, can maybe put you in a hospital, and the brown recluse can cause damage. Your tissues can be damaged because when they bite. So those are the 2 spiders we don't like. But for the most part, they have poison, but they don't affect you. Okay, they might sting a little bit and so on, but they have poison. They have a respiration system, just like not like us, but they need oxygen. Most insects need oxygen, and how do they do it? Well, they have little holes in their body. This spider, in particular, has these what they call book lungs, and these book lungs are like thin tissue paper stacked up upon each other, and that's how they breathe. They're in the abdomen, which is the back part of the spider, and there's little holes in there which are able to bring air in, and that's how they breathe. All insects need air. You want to kill an insect? Suffocate. Just a little thing. Okay, so let's talk about the wolf spider. And we talked about eyesight. Let's take a look at eyesight. Now, this one has, most spiders can have 4 pairs of eyes. There's some that have 6 pairs. Now, do you like this guy? That's why a lot of people, the fangs, the eyes, here's even a close-up. There you go. He even has blue eyes, really up close. Isn't that neat? I mean, God is an amazing God. What he does with these lowly things makes you really amazing. Now, you might say, well, I just love these guys. They have 8 eyes around themselves. They can see anything. They're simple eyes. They're not like insects, compound. One thing that's amazing is their web. Many of us know about webs. We've walked into them. They construct webs. This is an orbit web, and it's very interesting. I don't have time to show you how they do it, but it's a very interesting way. They let it down, the stickiness attached to it, so they can throw it anywhere. It catches on a branch, and then it's just amazing to see them at work. But it's made from silk, which is very flexible and extremely strong. Now, most man-made materials are either strong or flexible, but never both. A spider web, a silk spider web, has that, and can be strong, yes, very strong and very flexible. If the very thin spider silk, if the very thin spider silk is used to weave into a rope, it would be stronger than a steel pipe of the same size. So if I were to put it in a rope that a cowboy lassos his little cows with, or whatever, his horse with, it would be like a steel pipe. That's how strong it would be, yet flexible. I love this illustration. A spider silk rope that is just a bit thicker than a garden hose. So, your garden hose size, make it a little garden hose size, okay, 5/8 or whatever it is. You can take that silk, stretch it out, and it could take the weight of 2 full-size Boeing 737s. Isn't that amazing? Now, when I think about this, I didn't even talk about molecules, but I got to show you the spider. The spider is unbelievable. It's also sticky. The web is also sticky. You ever get it on you? You can't get it off. Scientists today are trying to develop that stickiness is something that we can't create. It's so sticky. And so now we're trying to figure out how to make that stickiness. So scientists are looking at this and seeing how that can be developed. Now, here is a picture of the spider. See all the different parts. I'm not teaching you biology today, but I want to focus on one little part. That's a spinneret right back here. You see it? You know about the fangs with the poison, right? Okay, now that's a spinneret. That spinneret constantly works, always producing silk. So out of his back abdomen, it's able to produce all this silk, make these fine-tuned webs, and the web is gone one day, it's back the next day. They're amazing creatures. When I look at this, and I try to compare tornadoes to spiders. No, tornadoes to spiders, what am I getting? Well, let's focus a little bit. Tornado, okay? Tornado, what's a tornado have? Well, we know it's devastating, it's strong, it has forces of nature are very powerful. It has specific conditions for it to be produced, for an event to take place. So we know about these conditions. Now let's go over to the spider. Let's take a look at the spider. Well, the spider has some interesting factors. It has extremely complex with many different parts operating to accomplish a common purpose. Now, I didn't even talk about molecules, did I? Because when you talk about the molecular nature, that gets even more complicated. But just to show you the outside, you can see right off the bat that you can see a spider and know it's much different than a non-living thing, okay? It's built-in system, specialized information system, a built-in specialized information system, DNA and genes to provide for the construction, management, and processing of the designated parts for the system. In other words, it can continue. A tornado doesn't have a way of reproducing itself. Oh, it can maybe forces break up itself, but then eventually becomes distinguished. We're talking about multiplication. This goes against the laws of entropy because the laws of entropy go down. We're multiplying. Now we start working in, where did this come from? This information is extremely special. Living organisms have this. So they have ability to be extremely complex. All these parts working together. They have an information system. And lastly, I love this. They have energy. They have an energy system, a built-in energy system that keeps them moving. Tornado doesn't have a built-in energy system. Well, the fact is, once the conditions disappear, they're gone. But that little spider, warm, hot, that thing is going to move. Why? It has its own energy system. It's able to provide, spin the web so it can get its prey, so it can eat. It's a carnivore. So it has a purpose, has a specific thing to do. Now, the reason why I compare these two is for this. When we look at tornadoes, we know they're non-living, correct? Even though they have the forces and all that necessary, they're non-living. When we look at spiders, what do we see? We see living. I define living things just with those three things there, just those three statements. Power, energy, DNA, information, and complexity in its systems. Now, I can go on, there's many definitions of life, but this kind of sums it up in so many ways. Non-living basically is made of little components. They come and they go, but living systems are overwhelmingly complex. They have information system, and they talk about a power system that moves them back and forth. So I'm going to show you one of my favorite pictures here. This is a combustion engine. You see it? It works really well. Now, it didn't come from the sky. We know that it took a lot of design that went into it. We keep perfecting it. We keep working on that. It's what keeps our cars moving today. And this is a cell. Now, the cell is a working machine too, all right? We know that combustion engine needs a manual. This cell has a manual too. It's very more complex than this one over here, the one right here. The manual we're talking about is really big. It's thick. Biology books can be written about it. Because when we talk about a euglena, this is a protista, moving back and forth. I mean, that's complex in itself. Little hairs, the cilia on the outside, got a nucleus. And I can go on and on. It gets complicated. It can has information systems so it can multiply and so on. So we know that these things not come, the origin of life as we see it, the process that they would like to say it's a process of random haphazard genetic changes, which is terribly wrong because it goes against all our intelligence. So two contrasting views. Darwin's worldview says from the bottom up with struggle and survival. It's very negative. If you think about Darwin's idea, he says you start from natural selection, the stronger shall survive, and there's going to be a complete war against the weak, and the weak are going to be destroyed, and the strong will survive, which is kind of, think about Jesus saying that, we should feed the poor. This is contrary to what God's teaching us. So we look at this kind of, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about this idea of fighting for survival, dying. It's millions and millions of deaths just to move on. And we can't make sense of this. There's no real mechanism for this. But there is an opposing view, a creationist worldview, that says we start from the top down. In other words, there's a divine intelligence outside, and he comes down with his intelligence. He earmarks us. He gives us our fingerprints all over the earth so we can see him. You see it? And so we reflect on this. And when I think about this, I always go to John 1:1. See, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. Everything we observe, every idea, every thought is part of God's plan. It's part of what it's all about. You think the sovereignty of God no, God is sovereign. And so John 1, in the beginning was the Word was with God. And as we look at the verses carefully, we see that in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him, all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. When I look at that spider, you know what I see? I see God. Because, see, he manifests the life. God, Jesus Christ, is the creator of the universe. He spoke the word. So we put this all together, and we see that life itself manifests God as a creator, manifests God. In him was life, and that life was a light of the world. So when I look at life, physical life, I can look at spiritual life too. That's Pastor Steve's job, but it's all the same. It's the enlightenment to see God, to see these things function. I can see the light of God. I can see the light of Christ there. So the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not understood it and overcame it. Why? Because they don't have the Spirit of God in them. You can present all the facts to them, but most importantly, they need the gospel. But we will present facts because we have a logical God. So the light shines in the darkness, but they're not going to, they can't see it. They're blinded. Logic speaks very clearly. In today's society, I'm wondering what's going on because I don't see logic. To you, these are things that bother me to a certain extent. So the search of life, part 2. I'm going to just go this in different sections. I have 5 seconds. So the search of life, dismantling the theory of evolution from molecules to man. So we are always searching for life. And when I wrote the director's letter, that's coming out soon. It's going to be at the printer soon, and so it should be mailed out shortly. I find that NASA and everybody just thinks of life like there's going to be life. We can find life. There's going to be life. There's going to be life on Mars. There's going to be life. So I wanted to just share this with you. On February 10, 2021, it was written that there is an advancement extraterrestrial civilization inhabiting a nearby star system. We might be able to dictate it using its detect it by using its own atmospheric pollution, according to the new NASA research. The study looked at the presence of nitrogen dioxide, which is on Earth is produced by burning fuels, fossil fuels. It can also come from non-individual sources such as biology, lightning, and volcanoes. So what they're going to do now to discover life, they're going to look for pollution. Isn't this crazy? They're going to be looking for pollution to discover life. Now, to me, this gets a little crazy, but this is what NASA has been doing over the years. It's not rational to talk about life so fluently, like it's going to happen. I mean, this is going to happen. It's, to me, you're talking nonsense because life is much more complicated. So the characteristics of Earth, we have a beautiful planet here. We literally have a planet that's filled with water. The Earth has 70% water coverage, which no planet has. It is well balanced atmosphere. We have nitrogen at 78.09%, oxygen at 20.95%. If we increase the oxygen level to 22%, we'd have the amount of forest fires would increase by 70% with oxygen. Forget about global warming. I'm talking about oxygen. Just by fooling around with these oxygen levels, they're very well controlled. We live in the Goldilocks zone. What does that mean? We're in the right place in the universe because the temperatures are just perfect. We get the right energy from the sun. I can go on and on. Our average temperature is 54.7 degrees. The active planet, with its crust moving in sections described as plate tectonics, produces volcanoes, earthquakes, and tsunamis. It goes on and on. We have a lot of activity going on under us because the crust is moving. And as the crust moves, it bangs into another plate of crust, and it bangs in. And then we have these earthquakes. They go down. We have subduction. Then we have volcanoes exploding. So we have what we call an active planet. You won't see that in Mars and many of the other planets. You might see some activity, but not like you see on Earth. So we have an active dynamic planet. Now, I talked about the Goldilocks line, Goldilocks area. Goldilocks area is between, let me get over here. There's the Earth, right? And so we have a little further from the Earth this way and a little bit back this way is a Goldilocks area. So I'm going around the Goldilocks area right here. It doesn't extend to Venus and it doesn't extend to Mars. You see, if you take a look and you see that the temperature in Venus, is 750 degrees, okay? The temperature in Mars, because it's so far back, is minus 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Earth, we are 54.7 degrees Fahrenheit. Isn't that amazing? We are the right temperature. We live in an amazing place, the Earth. It was perfect. It was designed that way, you see? So at least 20 essential factors in all life to exist on Earth. That's what we call it, the Privileged Planet. Beautiful video that's out, DVD. I would recommend you see it. It's beautiful. They talk about, hey, if you have these 20, just I mentioned oxygen, the air, water, there's lots of other factors, and we can add more to those. And we put them in and say, what are those chances ever happening in space to get this place, the Earth? It would come out to 1,000th of 1 trillion. The chances, one chance out of 1,000th of 1 trillion. You know, I could put more factors in there, the probability would increase and increase. So when I hear things, oh, we're going to go to Mars, we're going to go out in space, we're going to find life. I said, wait a minute. Do you know what you're talking about? Do you know how special life is? Remember, God is shining his light through life. We're going to see God we're going to see God in what he does. We're going to see his characteristics. The invisible God becomes light. And we're going to see it with light. So lunar rocks. Well, we did 842 pounds of lunar rocks, and we did what? Over 2,200 samples and 6 different space flights. And what did we find? It was a failure. There's no life there. How about Mars? The Mars rovers have been in Mars and so on. We found out that the reddish plant, yeah, we have iron oxide. That's why it's red. It's like our blood's red. We have exhaustively studied Mars for many years, initiating 79 space missions. In other words, when we went to, we had a satellite go around it, we just checked it out to see what we're going to do. The research was concerning this planet included examining the rocks and soil. The soil is poisonous. It has perchlorates in it. So if you go on there and you just touch the soil, you can it can just be poisonous. I mean, you got radiation from the sun, so they'll definitely, they get to Mars, they're going to be wearing spacesuits. They're going to have to. Now, ready for this? I love this. This was just found recently with these high photographs, high contrast photographs. They were able to see, looks like canyons. You see the canyons? They have shelving over it. This is what you see when there's water. This rock here has crossbedding, shelving, crossbedding. This over here represents sedimentary rocks. Now we know sedimentary rocks are important because they are driven by water. So this is what they said. NASA says it's actually, this is a Dr. Michael Malin. And this is what he says. And what ultimately may be their most significant discovery, yet Mars scientists say high resolution pictures showing layers of sedimentary rock paint a portrait of an ancient Mars that long ago might have had featured numerous lakes and shallow seas. As soon as that comment came out, everybody says there's life there. As soon as they said, we're going to find fossils of life. It's so easy to talk about life and say that these molecules made life that I think it's ridiculous. They just say it. They throw it out all. It's a lie. Life is much more complicated. It's fragile. We look in terms that once there's water, they make a big jump. Now there must be life. See this all the time. This is the present thinking of NASA that in the past there must have been some sort of life on Mars with this hostile environment, present hostile environment. Remember, Mars is still a fourth planet. Mars is not in the Goldilocks zone. You got to change everything around. I don't know how water can exist. It could have been ice. It could have been melt. I don't know. We don't know about the history of that. But we can make a lot of assumptions upon assumptions. Evolutionists are always looking for traces of life everywhere because they have a false hope that chemicals themselves can produce some simple life form. And water is the magic ingredient to get this process going. That's a fallacy. That is a myth. Let's go into this for a little bit. John 11, 24, 26 says this. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection of the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? And so when I look at God's life and the life he has for us, let me tell you, this life that he has that we're living, the life that we see that he enhanced here on this earth, that he breathed on the animal. I mean, he gave life to the animals. To me, this is God's way of showing us that he is very special. So I want to dismantle this myth I was talking about earlier about water. Where there's water, there is life. That is ridiculous. That is a myth. Water is an amazing molecule. I agree. I taught chemistry for many years. I love water because water is that, I mean, no living organism can exist without it because the intrinsic properties, like the fundamental ability to transport materials in and out of cells. You know, your blood is made mostly of water. That water is able to move in and out of cells. I mean, think about it. The ability to have water gives us the ability to transport lots of things because of the properties of water, which we'll explain in a moment. Water is inorganic, so it's non-living, okay? Non-living, okay? It's like that tornado, but it's different because it's a molecule, okay? Okay, transparent, tasteless, odorless, and nearly colorless chemical substance, which in the main constitutes on the Earth's hydrosphere. So we take the Earth, we know it's 70% water, there's water underneath, water everywhere on the Earth. So there are two reactive gases, hydrogen and oxygen. When you add those two gases, I used to do this when I taught chemistry. I had hydrogen over here as a gas and balloon, and I brought a light match and lit it up, and guess what? We got some explosion. You know what we actually did? When I lit that match up, brought the oxygen in close to the balloon, we made water. You couldn't see it because when it exploded, it evaporated all the way up. Now, think about this. Water is stable. Once that takes place, this hydrogen and oxygen, when they combine, they make a very stable bond. This is so stable that you can't burn water. You can burn a piece of meat, right? You can burn a carbohydrate, like, you can burn your toast. But can you burn water? No, what does water do? It boils. What does it do? It evaporates, okay? It goes into a cloud. And what does it do? It comes down again. So I always told my students that the water you're drinking right now, the water that you're drinking could have been time Julius Caesar lived. You could be drinking some of Julius Caesar's body. You don't even know, because the water recycles itself over and over again. That's a miracle by itself. We say stable, that's stable. The bonds, the idea of these angles. Now these angles make for, and I don't want to, this is not a chemistry lesson, but just so you can understand, this is an area of attraction, a negative attraction. This is positive attraction. So when you have these kind of attraction areas, they attract things. They attract like the sodium in your system, in your blood, and so on, in your water. So, because the blood is based on water, you have sodium, you have potassium. Very important in the nervous system. You have the potassium sodium exchange. Your muscles move with that. So water is an ingredient to carry that. And so that's why every living organism we know of needs the sodium. Needs the water. Needs the other things too, but it needs the water, because water is very important ingredient, very important resource to have in life. So in all it's sensitive to changes. So our body, the acid and base thing that we have, you can eat an orange, you can eat, something that's acid. Your body never changes, because you have with water, you make these acids and bases that combine and combat each other so that your system stays stable. That's another issue. That's in blood, and that's where carbon dioxide makes carbonates, and it goes into an unbelievable chemistry. But you can see God really working, and you can see how water is a very important source. Interesting that we would use water in baptism. And by the way, water was created in the second verse in Genesis. The Spirit of God hovered over the deep, over the waters. You check it out, you'll see it's an important resource, and God created that directly. It was a direct creation. It didn't come from God. God created that because the water was there for the Holy Spirit to hover over. Okay, so we have, in the past, we've had experiments done where they said, oh, look, we got a piece of meat here, and all of a sudden we got maggots. And so Reddy said, I'm going to solve this problem. I'm going to just close your jar and keep it away from the flies. And guess what? We have no more maggots. Pretty simple experiment. He always said, God is the bearer of life. He said that. I quotes from that. We also have Pasteur's experiments. He came by in 1859 and he said, you know what? I'm going to nail this once and for all that life comes from non-life. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these beakers of broth. And what he did was he took the top of that cylinder right here. And what he did was he bent it so the air couldn't go in. And as he did that, germs couldn't get in there. And as a result, they stayed sterile for a whole year. And when he broke the neck off, everything went crazy. Pollutants came back in there. Unbelievable. So, and he concluded this, that life can only beget life. And that's the most important thing. Life begets life. Who begot us? A living God made us. That's important. A living God made creation. The living God is the author of life. So we see life can come only from life itself. Now, Mill and Yuri's experiment in 1952, this has been extensions of this, but basically what they did is make assumption after assumption. They said, oh, I wonder how this atmosphere might have been. So they created an atmosphere that supposedly was non-reducing. So they put H2O, methane, and they put all these gases. They left oxygen out. Guess what? We find oxygen in all our rocks, even the oldest rocks. You can't get rid of oxygen. So they made assumption after assumption. And what they did in this little broth is they found some amino acids. And everybody was happy. Oh, look what we found. We found some amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks of life. And they said, look, we got the building blocks of life. No, that's not so fast. They also produce things like formaldehyde and cyanide. They also produced a lot more of these amino acids that could be poisonous. And as a result, they could poison the experiment, not the cyanide, but the way they were, you go right or left, all of them had to be left. They all go this way. And if you don't go this way, now these are molecules, the way they're arranged in space. You can't have like this. You can't have left and right. You only have one way. And so the left hand is where you had to go. So they had to connect left hand to left hand. And so just like my fingers are, they couldn't go like this. They had to connect a very certain way. And if they went the other way, they would form what they call racemic mixtures, which will cause things to die and die off. So that was something that, I mean, everything they did and what they claimed was really a failure, because there was no life whatsoever. They didn't even produce the things that we're trying to produce, like proteins that make up our life. So in 80 years since the invention of the electron microscope, the knowledge of the invisible world of biomolecules has grown exponentially. With this microscope, we began to see a whole new world. 500,000 times what you can see with your eyes. We now could see things like, yes, we can see things like we're talking about bacteria, and we can see them with a light microscope, but now you can really see into them. I have some pictures I'm going to share with you in a little bit, so you can see some bacteria. And we talked about viruses not too long ago, and there's the virus. They can see viruses, which I showed. We talked about the coronavirus, COVID-19. We talked about that virus. And they even have the molecules, the machines that work with it. So the molecules we can see now with an electron microscope. It opened an unbelievable world. Our knowledge grew exponentially. And did it grow? So how is life? What is life? And what materials are made of life? So I'm going to start off with one thing that's very important. It's called protein. And proteins basically are virtually involved in every chemical process in life. Proteins are everywhere. If I say you got antibodies, that's a protein. Your hormones, testosterone, all those hormones, put them all together, all those hormones are proteins, okay? What if I said your blood, hemoglobin, moving back and forth? Well, that's a transport. They take things and transport them from place to place. Hemoglobin is a transport. We've got things that work on structure. They build up the tissue. They build up and the tissues build up the organs. So they're so important. They make up. If we don't have proteins, we don't have life. That's why they were trying to make them with amino acids. Amino acids are the basic building blocks of the protein. And so there are 20 different proteins, 20 different kinds of beads, so to say, to make up 20 kinds of amino acids to make up the protein. So what you see is a protein. You see it? It's made of little units called amino acids. Now, they just don't come anyway. They have to be specific. So we have an abbreviation. We have like GLY is glycine, and LYC is lysine, and ALI is alanine. And I can go down the list. There's 20 of them. And what you see in front of you is this kind of, it looks like some sort of necklace that's kind of squeezed together. Now, this is kind of, you lay them out, they all have to go in the right order, and that's how you make your protein, okay? So protein is made of amino acids. Now, making a protein. So what you do is you take your amino acids, okay? And you take your amino acids and they bond together, what we call a peptide. They actually come together like this, and they start bonding together. And then when they bond together, they make a chain. Notice the chain. It's never simple. Now, your enzymes, you have enzymes in your body, a little nano machine. Every protein has to be made in a very special way. Now, we look at this. We look at the fact that the protein, by digesting, you see this is a protein, now you have to digest your food. So what happens is this protein has to be locked up. So what does it do? It breaks up, okay, and it gets into a peptide. A peptide is when you have a couple of them together. Then eventually it breaks this up, and that's what you can use in your system. Very functional. And I love this. I found this graphic, and I got to share it with you. I love this. You'll see it in a second. This is a protein. Take a look at it. See that protein right there? Okay. Now that's not the protein. That's lots of proteins. See over here? This is they do in the ribosome, but they also have enzymes. Remember I said enzymes, those are proteins too. Those are machines. The best way to say it. They're machines. And what that machine does is it takes it and folds it. The protein is always folded. Why? It's got to fit. It's not only manufactured in the right sequence, then it's got to fit over here. Proteins have many different forms, shapes, and functions because they are highly complex. So when you hear protein, I'm going to take a protein shake. You have to understand that you are highly complex. A lot different than water, right? Water is H2O. Now we're talking about complexity. We're talking about, you'll see information too. Here is a hemoglobin. It's made of 4 hemes. Now, I thought you'll like this. Every red blood cell, okay, has 200 to 300 million hemoglobin molecules. 200 to 300 hemoglobin molecules sit on that protein. Let me open it up so you can see it. There it is. You see it? And those hemoglobins are able to capture oxygen. Now think about it. What is the most important resource we have? I mentioned water, but I'll tell you what comes first. Oxygen. Oxygen is needed because you consume a lot of energy, whether you know it or not. You breathe, you're consuming energy. Your heart's pumping. You need lots of energy. And where are you going to get that immediate burst of energy? From oxygen. And that's why this has to be cleverly designed. This molecule, this hemoglobin, is a great big thousands and thousands of things holding this together. And in this molecule, you have these iron Fe's. 1, 2, 3, 4 in one of those hemoglobin molecules. 4 centers. Why? Because they want to capture that oxygen so it doesn't go away. You follow? Your blood has to capture that oxygen because that oxygen has to be transported through the cell, and eventually it's got to go into the cell so that it can put the energy where it's supposed to be, the ATP and ADP. That's another machine. It's your powerhouse of energy. It keeps you going. So it's amazing to see this. I get excited about this molecule. It's beautifully shaped. Like, who created this? Who would make something like this? The hemoglobin is a large molecule composed of 2 alpha subunits and 2 beta subunits. So this is the alpha. I don't want to go. So if you break this up in 4, you can see it. I have it underlined. So the myoglobin, okay, are found in the muscles and mostly are large coil polypeptides that make up the most of the molecule. So in these little things, okay, of polypeptides, and they go around and around, and eventually this is one section, okay? One section. So that section there is responsible for the redness in the muscle in your heart. It's also, every time you eat a piece of meat, you notice that it's red. Why is it red? Because it has hemoglobin in it. Why? Because one of these sections, see this little section here? It's kind of redundancy in the production, but this little section here goes into the muscle so it can keep the oxygen in it, saturated, so it can be used in its accordance time. So without the meat decaying, if you get fresh meat, or you hate to say it, but it could be bloody meat, you take it out. That's you got to cook it. You got to change its composition. You got to, so it's very interesting how delicately this is weaved together. So another little thing that we talk about is that these proteins make up motors. This is bacteria, and it has a flagella. The flagella is the tail over here. And there are bacteria that they can have 16 tails. They have all these kind of crazy tails. You can go crazy with bacteria in their tail. Unbelievable. And there's a motor we're going to explain in a second. Most recent estimates put the number of cells at around 30 trillion in a human body. An adult human body, you have 30 trillion cells. Now wait, you got something else. And most of the, by the way, the majority of these cells are hemoglobins, or red blood cells. Now, this is kind of showing you what you might have in your intestine. This came from the 10 times more bacterial cells you have in your body than you have cells. So if you have 30 trillion cells, you have 300 trillion bacteria on your body. Now, some of you might say disgusting. No, missing the whole point. Bacteria is where everything kind of it's a basic living cell. I mean, it's a living cell that, I mean, that we really depend on. It, look what it does in the intestine. It helps digest our food. It helps break down materials continuously. It also builds up things. Bacteria is extremely important. That's why you have so many on your body. You're designed that way. Kind of ugly picture there with all the, and you can see the little flagella there. You see it, little tail over there. Now here's the motor. Yeah, this is cholera. I'm sorry. This is how to get the right name. So it's cholera. It's a disease, and it's not a nice disease because it usually happens with fecal material when people are not cleaning their water very well. Okay, here's the bacterial flagellum. You can see all the working parts. Now, how was this made? It was put by proteins. Remember that protein was designed? It could have fit right in here. Okay, been one of these parts, or it could have been one of these parts in here. So in this this flagellum, this tail has a rotor. You can see a rotor, a hook. I mean, a stator. I can go on all the different parts. But bottom line is that here's one with multiple flagella. You can see it. We see this, and we see it in a way that's unbelievably fantastic. So the tail moves about 17,000 RPM. It moves in two directions, forward and reverse, reversing half a turn. Now this is remarkable. They would go to a quarter turn and come back again. Usually engines don't do this. They don't stop and come back again. Got to give it rest time. And lastly, it's driven by an acid protein motor, which is highly efficient. These molecules in our body, the nanomachines, how they operate, forget about the efficiency we see today. These are highly efficient. You see God's handiwork? You see the miracle he sees working all the time? There are 40 operational parts that consist of this, and I don't know how many proteins to make this stuff. It's amazing when you look at it. The rotary motor is cooled by water, as we mentioned earlier. It's acid driven, and then we mentioned the water is important. Water is also a coolant, by the way. It actually cools things down. We used to use it on engines to cool the engine down because water has a high absorption capacity. There are many properties of water that are amazing. The fact that it can expand and so on. But water is nothing like life. You follow? Water is amazing in itself, but when I look at life, and we know about this because in Genesis 1:30 to 1:33, it says, "And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on earth, and everything that has breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, and the sixth day. So every beast that has life on earth, God created with the breath of life. So it says here, I have given every green plant for food, and it goes on before that. It says on the earth, everything that has the breath of life. God he's given the breath through his spirit. And you can't make an amoeba. You can't make a protist. You can't make a bacteria. Why? Because the idea of life, think about it. Life has so many components that only can come from God. Now, the DNA molecule defies evolution. So I just love this. Molecule itself is made of it's made of information, and the information is in the code. So wherever you see a G, you see a C. You ever see an A, you have a T. So the G and the C connect, and the A and T connect. That's how that works. So A, T connects, C, G connects. And that's a code. That's like a binary code. It works the same way. And so when I look at the code of life, everything is dictated by our DNA. In other words, what we're going to reproduce is going to be function of the DNA. That's where all the information is. And as I said, I gave you kind of a code. It's what? It's A, T, C, G. A, T, C, G. That's how the DNA operates. It operates with those two sectors. So wherever there's a C, there's a T. I mean, wherever there's an A, there's a T, and wherever there's T, there's a G. That's how it operates. Now, DNA, there are 3.2 billion pairs. Billion pairs. There are 3.2 billion pairs right now, and we examined. We opened it up, and that's how many things we found. So each section, each one of those A's and T's and D's, there are 3.2 billion of those things, okay? That's a lot, all right? Let's go on. We found that there are still holes in the sequencing. In other words, we found areas that we don't understand. Only 30,000 human genes only used to make 300,000 proteins in the human body. Now think about that. There's something going on here. And we're going to find out that it's a lot more confusing than we think. When we started to open Pandora's box with this DNA, we didn't realize what we were getting into. It is absolutely amazing because those genes will make the proteins. How do we get the proteins? They're made by the genes, the DNA inside the genes. The genes are made of DNA. Presently, DNA is demonstrated with remarkable properties for so much that is not used 98% of it. When they found out that the proteins, 2% were used to make those proteins, only 2% of DNA made to make proteins, it blew their minds. Said, what have we got? We did more research and found out that we're using that 98%. And so what we know is that it's a very thin filament, DNA. It's very thin. It measures 0.000002. It's like a nanometer, 2 nanometers thick. One cell contains about 6 feet of DNA. So it's very thin, but it's wound up, really wound up tight. In the entire human body, there's 25 million kilometers. The number of equivalent to the distance of 168 trips to the sun and going around the Earth 625 times. You got so much DNA, you can take 168 trips to the sun, or you go around the Earth 625 times. So that DNA is unbelievable. Okay, the DNA is a thin filament whose length would reach the sun and the Earth, weighing only a half a gram. So this DNA, we're talking about a molecule, minuscule molecule. Right? Remember, you need an electron microscope to see. You can stretch it 93 million miles and only weigh a half a gram. That's about the weight of a paperclip. And go a little further. You can squeeze the DNA in your body in ice cube, okay? You stretch your DNA out to an end, they would reach at least 10 billion miles and go as far as 170 million miles. So by just taking that out, that's what you could do in an ice cube. Now, I'm going to share some of this stuff with you, how it's wound up. It's amazing to see how this DNA is wound up with so much information. Then we see that we look at the idea of a postage stamp. 1/15th weight of a postage stamp, you can make all the information, make 5 billion people up today. So it has so much information. It's unbelievable. The sum knowledge currently stored in libraries, the world is estimated 10 to the 18th bits. I just did a project on this. I did some research on this and I wrote it up in the newsletter. And it's amazing. It could store, I think I talked about 2 trucks, 2 truckloads, weight and so on. That's how much DNA, I mean, literally in those 2 trucks, and I'm pickup trucks I'm talking about, the weight of those pickup trucks, and there's 2 pickup trucks, would be equal to the weight of the DNA, which will contain all the information, the libraries, the information that we store in libraries, even the data information I have on this computer. Everything can be stored in that weight because it is so dense. The information can be stored and it becomes extremely dense. So DNA is a model for holding storage. And the idea of replicating is so precise. We do make mistakes, but if you so precise that it can be compared to 280 clerks copying the entire Bible sequentially. In other words, you take the Bible and you let this and type it, okay, and no errors, and she passes it on to somebody else. 280 times without mistakes. Now, I want to share this with you because it kind of shows you how these things are made. Now, it's not the best quality, but unlocking the mysteries of life is just a little tidbit. I don't have the capacity to show the eloquence of this, but I thought they did a great job. So I'm going to share this with you right now, and we'll get a little tidbit, a few minutes of this so you get an idea.
In the years since Kenyon's rejection of chemical evolution, science has revealed the details of an entire system of information processing that bears the hallmarks of intelligent design. With computer animation, we can enter the cell to view this remarkable system at work. After entering the heart of the cell, we see the tightly wound strands of DNA, storehouses for the instructions necessary to build every protein in an organism. In a process known as transcription, a molecular machine first unwinds a section of the DNA helix to expose the genetic instructions needed to assemble a specific protein molecule. Another machine then copies these instructions to form a molecule known as...
You're going to see, I'm going to demonstrate the opening of the molecule so you can see how DNA opens up. It doesn't, 300.2 billion pairs don't open, just a section opens up, okay? So here we go.
messenger RNA. When transcription is complete, the slender RNA strand carries the genetic information through the nuclear pore complex, the gatekeeper for traffic in and out of the cell nucleus. The messenger RNA strand is directed to a two-part molecular factory called a ribosome. After attaching itself securely, the process of translation begins. Inside the ribosome, a molecular assembly line builds a specifically sequenced chain of amino acids. These amino acids are transported from other parts of the cell and then linked into chains often hundreds of units long. Their sequential arrangement determines the type of protein manufactured. When the chain is finished, it is moved from the ribosome to a barrel-shaped machine that helps fold it into the precise shape critical to its function. After the chain is folded into a protein, it is then released and shepherded by another molecular machine to the exact location where it is needed.
This is absolutely mind-boggling to perceive at this scale of size such a finely tuned apparatus, a device that bears the marks of intelligent design and manufacture. And we have the details of an immensely complex molecular realm of genetic information processing. And it's exactly this new realm of molecular genetics where we see the most compelling evidence of design on the Earth.
The most compelling evidence of design on the Earth. That's what I think of DNA. It's compelling. It is, when I show you the protein, who built the protein? there was information for that design, and that had to come from the DNA. So now let's take a look. Here's the DNA. You see it? It starts to unravel. There is the chromosome. I'm going to show you. There's an X chromosome. We have X and Y chromosomes. We have pairs of 20. Humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes. The 23rd pair is the sex chromosome. It's either XX, boy, XY, girl. Okay? No, did I make a mistake? Sorry. XY, boy, XX, girl. Sorry. Okay. All right. Here we go. So here we go. So there's the ATCG. It starts to open. When it opens up, it then has the information to build the proteins. Okay? And that information is going to take that protein out of the nucleus, or where the DNA hangs out, where it stays, out into the cell, the cytoplasm, the liquid around the nucleus. And that ribosome, wherever it finds a ribosome, builds it into what it's supposed to be. And then it's manufactured to another enzyme that forms it the way it's supposed to be. So keep that in mind. Now, I'm going to show you this. This is kind of an amazing, I was able to capture this. This is a chromosome, and this is the open DNA. Now, this is what it looks like. There's a DNA, there, you see it? And it all of a sudden quickly folds up because it's going to reproduce itself. Now, DNA, remember I told you about all that information it is held, that's the secret. Because look how tightly it wounds itself up. And that's what makes it incredibly storage factory in its own way. So there is it opening up. Now there's a gene, okay? So what's a gene? Well, there's the DNA, you see it? There's the DNA. If you take a section, so when anybody says to you, your genes, they're taking sections of DNA. That section will give you the protein you need. Color of hair, for instance, you're always replacing hair, right? So, and eventually, like me, you're not replacing as much as you get older. But bottom line is that we are always replacing cells. So that cell will open up in an area, DNA will open up and say, okay, we got to get another cell here. Okay, so it opens up and that information carries to make a cell or to make a protein for that cell. Sorry, not the cell, but make a protein. It's quite more involved than that. Okay, so we see that. So genes make proteins. There can be traced to 10 genes can be traced to one protein. Now we have found one that can to make one protein, you need 10 genes. Sometimes it's a gene and a protein. Sometimes it's 5 genes. Sometimes it's 10 genes to make a protein. A protein to fit into your, let's say it was a cell for an epithelial cell for your skin, a kidney cell for your kidney. I mean, it goes on and on. That information keeps going on. So you can imagine what's going on in your bodies or any living thing. There are estimated 300,000 different kinds of proteins in a human. 300,000 different kinds of proteins make us up. So we have 30,000 genes, and you get the picture. We have less genes and more proteins. So they're multifunctioning. They're doing fantastic work. Scientists estimate that 2 to 4 million proteins make a bacteria. So for a bacteria to exist, we need 2 to 4 million proteins to make that bacteria. Proteins will make the wall, will make the nucleus, it makes everything in that cell, everything, so it can carry on. So this is the DNA packaging. See it? See now, how does it package itself? It packages itself because of this thing called histones. See it in here? Histones. And those histones are little balls, and they actually package themselves, wind them around there, and they really tight, and then they form. They keep doing it and doing it. The nucleosomes are formed, and before you know it, they get into this chromosome. See how that's done? So the DNA wraps itself up real tight in the chromosome. Now, you want to know some interesting things we found out? Remember that we only have 2% of DNA making proteins, structural proteins for muscles and so on. What do the others do? Well, the others are, we have things around here that actually will tell it to hesitate, to slow up, because it has an extra fold to do. We found that out with the DNA that's hanging around, the other 98%. We're finding out so much about that 98% that it's not junk at all. So we see that the idea that DNA is compared to chimp, and this came out 99%, and that is totally fallacious. It's more like 85%. It might even be more than that. And the more we study, we realize that this was it was actually a forced error. They did it with an incomplete genome of a chimp. I did a whole series on this. This is all wrong. So we don't, no wonder one kid said to me when I was discussing this, a youngster in elementary school said, "That's stupid. I don't look like a monkey." I mean, you take a look at it, the baby doesn't look like, but only 1% difference doesn't make any sense, does it? We look over here and we see that that scientists keep reminding us evolution is a random process which haphazard genetic changes interact with a random environmental conditions produce an organism somehow fitted than it's forever. And that was in the article in Time magazine. I had to take it out, and that magazine was published in what? In 2006. That's when it came out. So DNA. Thought 98% of DNA had no use. Now it's called junk DNA. We now know it's false. And as we look at this, we see that there's loads of information that DNA has. Now look at this butterfly and caterpillar, right? You know what happens to a caterpillar, right? It turns into a butterfly. And it goes through a complete metamorphosis process where the butterfly actually the caterpillar completely changes into a liquid, almost all liquid. And the genetics have to take over. Genetics have to go through that. And that's where this supposedly, call it junk DNA, is a terrible wrong thing, because we're finding out that that junk DNA is not junk at all. It's in that big process of information that controls it. Now we're finding DNA that the strings that 98%, some of it's controlling things. It's controlling, managing the way things, it actually moves things back and forth. So the whole idea now of DNA is becoming three-dimensional. We thought it was just to make proteins. Wrong. It's a lot more than that. I love this. David did this well. He says, "My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in the secret, intricate woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book, you were written in every one of them. The days that were formed for me, whereas yet there was none of them. How precious to me your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. In the beginning was the word, and the beginning was with God's word." Okay, sorry, that gets stuck in, but David had an amazing way of being able to look at us and see that God's majesty, his thoughts of putting us, and I love the way of writing it in a book. That's the DNA code being written in a book. So as we do our last part, there's mathematical challenges made all the way. How can you take amino acids, make peptides, and go peptides to, well, somebody did this and figured out the probability, and this is just mathematics. If you take 20 different, let's say, of these things, 20 different amino acids, little color balls, and put them in here and make this, the peptide, and made it a chain and made the exact order, okay, 150, the statistics would be, and you just can plug it in, it comes out to 1 chance out of 10 to 195th with 0. So what does that mean? 1 chance, okay, out of 1 with 195 zeros after. Now, that would take a lot of room to write, right? It's impossible. So I went and took those odds and said, okay, let's go and take the odds of winning I just took average odds of winning a lottery. And I said, if you were to take a ticket every day and you were able to win the lottery 24 times straight, that's the data we're talking about. Impossible, impossible. And then we talk about DNA mutations, the fact that these mutations basically can make proteins, and that was put to a test. And in 2004, a simple functional protein, correctly folded, is 1 followed by 74 zeros. Impossible. I mean, it's like 1 chance of 1 with 74 zeros after. Now, what they did was they got rid of, they said, okay, maybe we can use this, maybe we can use that. They were very forgiving in some of the things that they got, but still, it was way, way impossible. Actually, They said this: unless the number was overturned, somehow a decisive blow has been dealt to the idea that proteins arose from accidental causes. You cannot have abiogenesis, period. It's impossible. So when people say, oh, we're going to go to space and we're going to find, new life, that's absolutely crazy. You can see the data that even the evolutionary time frame of, I don't know, you want to call it billions of years, put 13.7 billion years of the whole universe. You don't have enough time to do that. You don't even have enough molecules in the universe to do it. It's ridiculous. I love this. This was from a famous quotes from Sir Francis Hall. He said, the chance of the higher life forms might have emerged in this way is comparable to the chance that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard might assemble a Boeing 747 from the materials within. That's a great quote. I love it. Here's another one by Creek. And he's a Nobel Prize winner in 1953 for discovering DNA. He says, an honest man armed with all the knowledge available to us could only state that in some sense, the origin of life appears to be a moment to be almost a miracle. So many that are conditions which could have had to have been satisfied to get it going. It had to be a miracle. That's why he went to Pam Spring. He had to come out from somewhere else. Same trouble, same things they're going to do. It's impossible. Don't let anybody tell you their life is easy and we're going to find it in Mars or find it in some planet. I love this book. It's a book we're using. It's a book we've been looking at. We're going to do a diagnosis of this book. We started to write on it. It's called The Stairway to Life, an origin of life reality check. And what they've done is the authors have beautifully put together Chang Laura Tang and Robert Stedler have put this stairway together, which shows you if you wanted to build, let's say, the first protein, you would have to have the right materials ready to go. And then only that, you would have to have, remember, left or right hand, they have to be have to be aligned, because you can't have left-handed and right-handed molecules. You all have to be one way. And then it goes through every one of these things that we need for life. And the stairway of heaven starts from chemistry all the way up to biology. It is impossible. I come to God and thank him for what he's done for us. For this is what the Lord said. Isaiah 45:18. You created the heavens. He is God. You have fashioned and made the earth. He founded it. He did not create it to be empty, but formed it to be inhabited. He says, I am the Lord, there is no other. Think about that. God made this earth to be inhabited. And then he declares, I am the Lord, and there's no other. Every time you look at a living thing, I don't care if it's an amoeba, I don't care if it's a bacteria. Every time you look at that thing, you got to know that there's a God. Because he says, I am the Lord, and there's no other. Don't put anything in front of me. I made this. This is a testimony to me that life is here on earth.